Hey guys, Jim Stoppani here at Elite FTS with Tom Sheppard. Many of you may know Tom as well. We're going to break down the bench press, whether you're training for strength or your goal is hypertrophy. Now, most people think of the bench press as just, a standard bench press from chest to full arm extension, but there's little nuances that make the form a little different, whether you are training for strength or hypertrophy. I'll let Tom break down the strength setup first.
Sure thing. So if we're setting up to achieve the maximal load that we can move through what we'd call a powerlifting bench press, which is just going to be from the chest to lockout, exactly how you set up is going to be a little bit different based on your proportions and your strengths. But the general rule of thumb that we're going to look for is we want to create maximal amounts of stability, limit the range of motion as much as we can, and bring as much of the whole body into the movement as possible, including the legs. So if we were setting up for a powerlifting style bench press, we'd be looking to get a good thoracic and lumbar arch. I'm just going to set up how I normally would for the demonstration purposes here. So how I would do it would be to glute bridge up on the bench, get the weight as high up on my traps as humanly possible, retract and depress the shoulder blades, get my feet underneath me and my hips as high up the bench as I can, screw my feet into the floor so I've got maximal tension through my legs now that are helping maintain that maximal arch. And now when I bring this out, my goal is going to be to bring it down in a manner that's going to minimize the range of motion, which is going to include bringing it down to a point on my chest where my forearms are staying vertical when viewed from the side. So if you were to look at me from side on, ideally where I want to be is my forearms vertical in space or as near as possible, because that's going to minimize the vertical distance that I have to travel to reach my chest and get that press command to then press it back up. Now, the stronger and more stable someone gets with the bench press, quite often they will be able to bring their grip out even wider, which means they can further limit the range of motion that they have to travel through. The downside of this, which Jim might well go into in a second, is that the wider we go, more we end up isolating the pecs, and to a large degree, we end up taking out the front delts and the triceps from the movement. So from a hypertrophy perspective, it becomes a little bit less well-rounded.
All right, now with hypertrophy training, when we're talking about hypertrophy, we're specifically talking about the chest. So as Tom mentioned, with strength, you're sort of bringing the whole body in to the exercise, right? Because your goal is to push up the maximum amount of weight. With the hypertrophy, we're really trying to focus more on the pecs, the chest, and bring that out since we want to build a big chest. And so the setup is somewhat similar, although the arch doesn't have to be as exaggerated. So I'll still arch, bringing those shoulder blades back and down. But now the main reason there is not just for stability, but if I lock my shoulder blades back and down, it's going to help to place more focus on the chest, and we're going to use less of the delts. Now, again, with the feet, you can screw them in, right? Pull them back. Not quite as critical. And again, we're going to keep a bit of an arch in the back, chest out, shoulder blades back and down. And then we can go wider as long as you don't have any shoulder issues. Again, that's going to help to place more focus on the chest. But again, the wider you go, the more stress it's going to place on the shoulders and can increase your risk of a shoulder injury. But if we keep those shoulder blades pulled back and down, there won't be any issues. Now, the main issue is the range of motion, okay? You may have seen a lot of bodybuilders do this where they only come up to about the halfway point. Now, you might think that this is cheating on the bench press, but this is actually helping them to keep the pec as the main mover, the chest, and minimize the use of the shoulders and particularly the triceps, which you would use at the top of the press. So with the bench press for hypertrophy, you really only need to come up to about the halfway point or so and back down. Again, that looks like cheating, but no, it's not this. You see a lot of guys doing this, right, which is ego lifting in the top range. It's quite different. And actually, you could argue that this actually makes the bench press harder, keeping it just in this range of motion. So those are the main differences on breaking down the bench press, whether you're going for strength or hypertrophy.
If you're looking to maximize that pec recruitment during that range of motion there, is there a type of angle that you'd look for, like upper arm relative to the torso, where most people, like if some people go super narrow,
so
they're going to end up in
is,
here,
right. So I like, only because I've had shoulder injuries because I'm so old, I use a very close grip, and I do more of a powerlifting style where my elbows are tucked in. But you could argue that going wider and bringing the arms out more is going to stretch the pec more in that bottom position. And we know now people are talking about how important the stretch is for hypertrophy. But again, it depends. Like I said, I'm doing this because of my shoulder and protecting the shoulder. So I'm kind of a middle ground, whereas, yeah, as long as you don't have any shoulder issues, going a bit wider is probably going to help target the pec more. However, a narrow grip will hit more upper.
Okay, sure.
Right? You know.
So if we're looking at, say, a powerlifter and a bodybuilder when they're performing their bench presses, obviously one's more strength, one's more hypertrophy. What would you see as like the ideal kind of cadence for their tempo if they're looking for hypertrophy? You know, usually in a powerlifting term, we're looking for semi-controlled descent, maximal acceleration on the way up to get as much momentum behind the bar as possible. Whereas if we're doing that same movement now for tension on the pecs and we don't want to lose that tension on the pecs, how would you prescribe someone
so it's a bit slower.
That?
So I would say probably even 2 to 3 on the negative, and then 1 to 2 on the, I mean, not super slow on the positive, but not explosive.
Just not enough to create like momentum.
Exactly.
Perhaps where you kind of lose muscular
Precisely.
Sure. Cool. And do you think then those two pools of individuals have something to learn from each other? For example, so the bodybuilder who's good at engaging their pecs and almost squeezing it off their chest in a controlled manner versus the powerlifter who maybe is moving greater poundages than the bodybuilder. Do you think they have things to glean from each other that they could perhaps use to enhance their results?
Well, definitely, because the more that the bodybuilder can lift, the more he can overload the chest. And so some strength training would be valuable just to get your numbers up. And then for the powerlifter, I think developing the chest, even though strength, they say, is mainly neural, right? There is, you definitely, if you gained, you know, how many pounds of muscle on your chest, you're probably going to also be stronger. So I think, you know, also incorporating some hypertrophy could help.
The reason I ask that is because especially in powerlifting, when things go wrong on the bench, tends to be out here.
Right.
We flare out here, right? Which you quite often is the lifter taking the load away from the pecs.
Yes.
Whether it's because they're weak or whether because they don't know how to create that contraction in that stretch position. So I wonder if spending some time with that kind of contraction style where it's learning almost to squeeze your pecs to get it off your chest and keeping that rotation in and not allowing the flaring out is maybe something that perhaps more powerlifters need to spend more time doing so they get a better connection at the bottom of there. Because very few people miss in here. Yeah, you know, a lot of the time it wings out and it starts drifting back, right? So is there like a chronic pec problem perhaps in powerlifting where we don't we everything's triceps and shoulders and whatever. We don't build a good enough connection of just being able to control that bottom third like you're demonstrating so well there.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. I like it. Cool. Very cool.
All right, guys, you like the content that we put out through Elite FTS. If it's the podcast, extra content, it's 20 years of being on YouTube, so there's a lot of different content there. We set up a membership YouTube channel, and with the membership YouTube channel, what you'll get is early release on all the podcasts, so you'll get access to it before everybody else. Those will also all be ad-free, so you won't have any interruptions and can listen straight through. And we'll have exclusive content, such as AMAs, to where we'll take all your questions and then answer them for you guys. So take a moment, join the channel, Is that what it is? Join the channel, join the YouTube. Just hit the join button and help support the podcast, and we'll help you.